Testing. New microphone. Testing. Hello. I move. I shake. I talk really close. I talk really far. I flap. Hello. I tweeted out about this. Why Quina? Final Fantasy IX's Quina. Was it Quina Quell? Quina Quen? Maybe the deepest, most sagely, most significant, consciously evolved, spiritually enlightened, based Final Fantasy character of all time. Of every main party character in the entire series. What an absolutely outrageous, outlandish clan. She is part of a clan. And I mean, talking about she, he, it. We don't really know Quina's gender. I'm just going to go with she. I'm going to assume Quina's gender just for the ease of this video. But I'm going to convince you by the end of this video why this ridiculous character that, quite frankly, up until 4 days ago, was the most pointless nothing burger, purely just comedy relief. And then even then the joke kind of got old after a while. Like, what a pointless character Quina is. All she cares about, its whole motivation is food. Everything's about food. You meet Quina in the foggy swamp and most of its dialogue is just about eating things, wanting to eat things. Can things be eaten? It tries to eat rocks. I'm switching to it. She goes on the whole journey with Zidane and the crew, on which a very tumultuous world and humanity-saving journey. There had to be tribulations. Quina was fighting beasts and creatures, and was there when the whole gang got floored by Garland. So Quina suffered, went through pain and difficulty, just like the rest of the gang did in Final Fantasy IX. And yet Zidane, Quina's motive was always just that pure and basic and simple. Food. Like Quina says, why focus on the little things? Life is just about things you can eat and can no eat. Quina also almost got married to Vivi. I love that moment. I so happy. And of course, when Quina talks about the little things, Quina considers basically anything else outside of eating food a little thing. Like here, the rest of the gang are struggling with their identities, their motives, their relationships, an existential crisis, especially Zidane and Kuja, the beings that they are, that I can't remember what their names were, but quite literally like existential crisis. Obviously Garnet losing her mum, Brane, big sexy queen Brane nearly being murdered, losing her kingdom, everything that Beatrix goes through with leaving the guards, literally murdering innocent people en masse. Beatrix is a war criminal, let's be clear. And Freya's story, super dark. And then Amaranth is obviously just a very angsty mercenary man who doesn't miss out. And obviously Vivi, Vivi's gonna roll into this quintessentially because Quina. I am now utterly convinced, maybe the deepest character of all the time, but I need to roadmap you how I got here. So it really was just me pondering one day as I was walking along the beauty of simplicity. I just did that political video which got a whole wave of positive and negative reception. Like I said, guys, I warned you. I warned I was going to take the wheels off the channel. Some people think I'm now going to become a political channel. No, I'm not. I'm going to do literally anything, everywhere, all the time. I'm going to cover Claire Obscuria, and not just play the game, but then also roll out videos if it inspires me and I have thoughts and feelings about it. I'm still going to do Final Fantasy stuff. It's going to be an amalgamation. Get used to it. But as I was walking along, I thought the complexity that we entangle ourselves with when it comes to things like the political landscape and debate that we all have, even just in our careers, in our day-to-day lives, who we are, the opinions we have. we build up such complexity and add so many additions onto ourselves. And obviously it's a beautiful thing, say, fundamentally what the crew do in Final Fantasy 9 and all our Final Fantasy protagonists, what pushes them to go on the hero's journey, to stand up, protect the innocent, save the world, save their kingdom. They've always got very complex motives. And all of them are positive. Some of them are for revenge and seeking to get justice. Like Reed just died, for example. I mean, that was a big part of like Noctis wanting to take out Arden. But then what stands out from all of the characters in the series, and including even the Beast ones, like Kumari, did have somewhat of a complex motive to him. Not a massively complex one, but it was there with the Ronso tribe and his relationship with Yuna, which was long founded and protecting her. Nanaki, actually a very, very complex motive. So even amongst the beasts, quote unquote, complex motives. But Quina stands apart from all of them. And what I've kind of felt in my life personally, spiritually, trying to take that journey, whatever that looks like, and if it's even quote unquote real, is that part of the Enlightenment journey, I feel it is a shedding of identifications, right? And I feel like even the most beautiful things that we're called to do in life, say like advocacy, what's going to push you to go to Africa and help kids out there, or to go to a war-torn nation and do work in those places? It has to come from very strong opinions and morals. So, and these are all essentially attachments, right? We build attachments based on our perception of the world, of right and wrong, of moral good versus moral bad, of duty and what it means to be a person fulfilling their higher purpose, I guess. But in all of this adding, I feel like it kind of runs counterclockwise. It comes to really beautiful outcomes and it guides your life. But you also get lost in the world of these additional identities that you've brought onto yourself. And it kind of consumes the beingness of just being here, the simplistic existence and the smaller joys, and in Queen's case of eating. When I'm the most occupied with life and bills and goals and dreams and travel and all of these things, all the things that make me feel like I'm accomplished as a person. So I think life has kind of taught us that to be an accomplished person is based on what your output is, what your productivity is. We're always doing, we're very seldom being. Being doesn't get any accolades in this capitalist world. Being is what? You're just sitting there doing nothing. You're doing nothing. When we see each other as friends, what you've been up to, how's work? It's built and intrinsically baked into us to be questioning and speaking about what our doings are. And what I've been trying to do, especially with holding present and staying present, trying to hold the moment. And to hold the moment, I have to drop what I'm doing at times. And it actually takes like a full-bodied commitment and intention to hold being present. But the joy and the beauty and the profundity that I experience inside, and I'm sure if you really cast your mind back to like what were the most awe-inspiring moments of your life, where you felt awe and wonderment, what was the common theme usually amongst all of them? You were there experiencing that thing in front of you. You were in the present, here and now. That's generally the theme, right? And that's what enlightenment, or at least individuals who have gone on that journey, point to us, right? I just immediately then, for some reason, thought of Quina. I was like, wow. Still served the higher purpose, still helped rescue humanity, but it didn't have any complex individualistic motives, goals, besides just food, just going and eating food. And it then made me think of the Hobbits. So this is where my went. I talk about Lord of the Rings a lot. I love it. Massive Lord of the Rings fans. I was like, wow, Queen is actually like the Hobbits. They're food obsessed, like they really are. Merry and Pippin start on the journey because they're still in Farmer Maggot's crops. Frodo got stabbed by the Witch King. Why? Because they risked it for some crispy bacon. The Hobbits with their big cheese wheels and the giant prized pumpkins. And everything's based around that simple joy of living. And we see that in Lord of the Rings, and then we really see it in The Hobbit as well. A lot of people say The Hobbit is crap. Too much CGI. Another moment that really stood out for me in The Hobbit as like the most powerful moment in that trilogy. The dwarves are here, and they come to Bilbo and they eat all his food. And then they roll him into this big, grandiose journey. And the whole way they're mocking him for wanting to be back at home with his doilies and his kitchen and his books and his armchair. And they kind of mock and look down on him, especially Thorin. I know you've been looking for an excuse to go back home, and really devalues him as a person. And then there's that scene, isn't there, where Bilbo, oh man, it gives me shivers. He's like, that's where I belong, in my armchair at home. See, that's what I love. That's where I belong. But I've come here because you don't have that. You had that taken away from you, and I want to help you get it back. And then you just see the sudden realization in Thorin's eyes of, shit, that is what this was all about. See, Thorin, in all of that complexity that I was just talking about, in going on this adventure, becoming a king, status and power and revenge and grief and responsibility and duty onto others, in all of that complexity, had lost sight of what the real fundamental goal was in all of this from the very, very beginning. And just in that moment to see that reminder, and I feel like, when Tolkien wrote Lord of the Rings, that's really what the Hobbits were intended to be, while the elves are presented as this super immortal, elegant race, that really the most enlightened ones, it was the Hobbits with their connection to the earth and nature and the gardens and simple things like food. Now, when I'm in my most complex moments, do you know how I'm not even mindful when I'm eating? I lose that mindfulness. And so I suddenly thought about Quina being in a very similar parallel role to that. And that's actually remarkably beautiful, to be so simple and intrinsically humble by nature of that simplicity, and yet still, when organically called, will follow a much grander mission, play a much grander role, for no other purpose but that you're called to do it. And there doesn't need to be any massive justification for it. I thought, okay, I'm starting to develop a respect for Quina. What is this? What is this feeling? I feel so strange inside. It's strange, but appealing. I feel hungry. If you know what I just did there, you know, and I love you. Now, the next step I then took after this, I was just going to talk about that. Just that very simple, what an inspiring thing when you really look into what that is and how we can actually maybe simplify our lives, become a bit more minimalist, or at least appreciate and have such gratitude, derive so much joy from such a small thing. And this then reminded me of a story of an enlightened master who, there's a few who have a relationship with food similar to Quina, very similar. So is Quina an enlightened being? I actually saw forum threads on this of just is Quina even capable of higher thought? Does it even have higher intelligence? This big-tongued, creepy-ass marshmallow-looking fuck. Does she even have the capacity? And a few people were like, yeah, I think so. Because if you look in the game, Quina can be sometimes the first to react and respond to various different scenarios, not necessarily with words, but with just the action, and does show moments of keen awareness, especially when I think Queen at one point says to Zidane that he's not being himself. So it's actually intuitive. And then, the Enlightened Masters, one of them, Trungpa Rinpoche was a very problematic person, I suppose. Mostly because he was unlike any of your typical enlightened masters. He was an extremely wise, extremely sage individual, had achieved a pretty high level of attainment, but he would still drink a lot of sake. People said he was pretty much like an alcoholic. He would still eat trash food. He would eat burgers. He would eat chips. He would eat pizzas. He's one of the first that came to America. He would even drive flash cars. He'd have sex. And a lot of people would look at him and say, that's not the behavior of an enlightened person. That's all egotistical. That's all lower conscious behavior and addiction. An enlightened person doesn't behave that way. But what Trungpa's gift was to show that how we perceive an enlightened person, that's all bullshit. That doesn't mean anything. There are more people trying to fake this persona of holiness and godliness and divinity, who abstains from all mortal desires. And he really stood as a testament to that not being the case. And one of the big things was, in his eating habit and his eating pattern. And I've just experienced this as well when I've been exploring the theme of enlightenment. When I've spoken to people around me, like, is that a goal in your life? Have you ever ideologically wondered about the phenomena of enlightenment, those beings who really do cultivate their inner world and go deep within, and in that find that liberation, and then just the illumination of them as beings, the love, the empathy, the intuitiveness, and but then also, when you say like freedom of suffering or freedom from suffering, I feel like these are also things that aren't necessarily true. Some of the most enlightened people also do suffer tremendously from their compassion. So I've heard. But they don't experience it in the same way, because there is the observer, us, that observes the world, and then the journey of within is becoming the observer, observing the observer, who's watching the watcher. The deeper elements of us, Carl Jung might call this the unconscious layer. Others might say the transcendental level. Some would say the soul. The attainment of enlightenment also goes by other names, like achieving samadhi, which is the dropping of all personas and masks. And when you speak to different people about it, I've seen some very curious reactions. Some people have said, no, I wouldn't want that because I love my emotions. I love my emotions. I wouldn't want to become this always happy, always zen-y, always guru. Like, I love the complexity of my emotions. Sometimes I go, really? But then I do also recognize there's like beauty in the polarity of suffering and then coming out of suffering. I feel like these themes have also shown up in Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy 13 was really big on this, like taking the the emotional and behavioral decadence of humanity and really holding it up as like, no, this is what is beautiful about us. This is what humanity is, especially when they go up against Bunavels. I'm like, fuck you, this is what we are. This was also in 16. Ultima really laid the smackdown on humanity. Just like, you are shit. I made you and I didn't think you turned out this shit. And Clive had to be there and really rep for humanity. And why even our flaws are a beautiful part of us. So I recognize in that sense why people are like, no, I wouldn't want enlightenment. I love the complexity of my emotions. But even that then is an assumption that becoming enlightened, you would lose your emotional depth or range. And actually, in my personal exploration of these kind of individuals, is very much the opposite. Many of them, Alan Watts, Trungpa, Ramdas, these individuals become more playful, more wacky, more humorous, more zany, more outgoing, more capable to just express their feelings, their affections, their love, their hopes, their wants, just without all of those typical inhibitions. And then they become more of their personality. It flourishes even better, or fuller. I don't know. And then this was the one that really then clicked as being a enlightened guru, Maharaji, who was basically the same as Quina. Same in every regard. His name was Ramakrishna Paramahasa. Parama, H-A-S-A. And Ramakrishna, in his time, he was a next level kind of individual. He was on just a whole different wavelength, a whole different dimensionality of existence and beingness. And his personality and his being was so strong that the gravity, it pulled so many people towards him, and he gained a massive, massive following of pupils and wanting to be in his presence and listen to his seminars. And it grew and grew very organically. He didn't really have a strong desire for it. He didn't push for it. It just came to him. Again, like walked into this higher calling, like Quina walked into hers, but without like a direct intention of this is what I'm setting out to achieve. The Hobbits never set out to achieve anything specifically for themselves. And he became so revered and so loved that he was kind of worshipped as a god in his time. Kind of worshipped as a god. And his status became much larger and grander, and he even had a wife. And he'd be doing these seminars, and all of a sudden he would drop what he was doing. He might have 500 people in a room listening and hanging on to every word, and he would get up and he'd run out the room and he'd burst into the kitchen. He'd say, "What's for dinner? What is it? What's on the menu? When is it? Is it food yet?" And people would be like, "What the?" He would just suddenly behave like a child almost, like a toddler. Like, where's food? Where's food? And he would do this constantly. Like morning, afternoon, just be that kind of food obsessed, essentially. It became a different person when it came to food. And people would talk about it and whisper about it, and everyone would have that same kind of thing of like, that's not how a person who is supposed to be like godly and we're looking up to, and people project onto you what they think you should be. And there was a lot of this happening. A lot of people started murmuring, like, maybe he isn't actually like all we think he is, like, especially when he behaves like that. And his wife would hear this. And then one day when he burst in and was like, "Where's the food?" she got annoyed with him and said, "Why do you behave this way? It is super embarrassing. It's unbecoming of, the role that we're playing right now. You talk to people about separating from and being aware of the traps of all these other desires. Why can't you shift out of this one? Can't you see that the way you're behaving about food is like a gluttony almost, and that you need to get rid of that?" And he'd say, "Oh, that's good, but when's food?" Yeah, very, very nice, dear, but when's food? And then she did it again and again and kept trying to reprimand him. And then one day he knew it was bothering her so much that he just said to her, "My wife, the day that I stop being like this with food, I'll be 3 days away from dying." This is how the story goes. 7 years then pass from that day, and wife brings out the food. He liked to sit in a swinging chair while he ate, and she brought it to him, and he just looked and he turned away. She burst into tears, instantly remembering, and then he said, "It's okay. It's okay. I'm ready for this next step." He knew his time was coming to an end, and apparently 3 days later he died. Now, whether or not this is just a flourish story, if it's actually real or not real, whatever, the point of it, the point is twofold, really. One, they say that when an individual, and this is Hindu thinking, becomes so far along their journey, when they've become developed and detached enough from this mortal coil, this 3D performance and play, when they become observed and aware of it enough, and they've burnt off all of their karma that they've come into this life with, karma being the things, according to Hindus, that come from previous lives, and the things that you have to work through and reconcile within your being. That he'd done this to enough of a degree very early on that for many, many of those years, for nearly 15 of those years I think it was, he was intentionally behaving that way around food because he needed something to tether him to this reality. He needed a desire to hold him here, keep him here. And so he was behaving this way essentially out of compassion to be there of service to the other people around him, even though there was no real necessarily personal need, no personal desire or motive. The guy was content. He had it. He detained it. But he held this on to keep him here in the mortal coil. When that left, he left with it because his soul was, his body just couldn't hold his soul, essentially. I feel like the second meaning of that lesson is that just by design of being here, being in this world, even a guy like him still had attachment. Now, I had this image that you had to kind of try to get over all attachment. And then I sort of looked at the journey of enlightenment as well. That's ridiculous because I don't know, I'm not capable of that. I have too many attachments to too many things. What about my Final Fantasy? What about snacks? What about 7 Remake Part 3 trailer when it comes? I'm going to lose my shit because I'm attached to it. But then this kind of like revolutionized my thinking to be like, no, just by nature of being here, attachment is an inherent part of this game. That, the absolute perspective is that all of this, attachment, seeking, grasping, suffering, joy, pleasure, sadness, grief, all of this is like on the relative, and that the higher dimension above that, and by above that, at our deepest, most core fundamental levels, like we came into the world with none of these things. We were just pure illuminated consciousness when we were kids, with none of our babies, with none of these extras added on. So, the absolute and the relative, and that they are not two separate places. That we go through the relative, we go through the experience of the human condition, and through desires and through wants and through attachments, and it's going through that journey that leads to that higher realization, that higher even essentially dropping. And it's in the experience of the dropping of these things, that's where the real growth is. That's where the real awakening is. You can't drop anything without first picking it up, And so, yeah, I had this story in mind of like Ramakrishna just leaving his body, but that an attachment to food. I was like, whoa, Quina's incessant attachment to food, very, very similar. What a parallel. Is that the enlightened master, that Quina is actually, shadowly, inadvertently, whether Square Enix or not, meant for Quina to be that kind of character? I just started looking at her that way. It's like, damn, that's cool. But that's where my journey ended. I was like, okay, that's just a theory, that's a speculation. There's nothing actually in the game to substantiate that Quina was a higher being. So I'll just be making a video on just like, oh, well, I had this thought. Wouldn't that be cool if Quina was actually like that? But there's no evidence in the game until then. Last night, I thought, well, let me refresh myself on some Quina dialogue lines. And I was going through them, and then I hit it. And suddenly, holy nip-nops. There is a part of the Final Fantasy 9 story where Quina returns back to the queue. I think their species is called the queue, sort of lands. And we have this very peculiar introduction into it, where Queen essentially runs in and sees a glorious feast of food and is just like, wow, and is like ecstatic and seeing all of the buffet that is laid out in all of its grandeur. Queen loses its shit. And then Zidane's like, what are you excited about? And then the food disappears. And then Queen is like, oh, did you not see it? All the food. And Zidane's like, what the fuck? Quina is bugging right now. Quina must have smacked down a hero's dose, 5.5 Gs of mushrooms, and is tripping. And then Quina runs off into another room. And then we suddenly see, I think it's Quan. It's Quan and Quell. Quan, I might have them the wrong way around, is essentially the master of the queue. And Quina sees, old master. And then Quan turns around and basically has this very bizarre, and then Quail also comes. I think Quail was one of Quan's disciples. And even just that, the fact that they call each other like master and whatnot, and just the way that the designs and the clothes are, is very Tibetan Buddhist. It looks like a Tibetan garb, to be honest. And obviously Square Enix are really into, obviously, Buddhism, and I've also shown areas where they've used Tibetan Buddhism in the series. So I was like, oh, wait, yeah, I know what they're doing here. Because I'd already mapped everything with Trungpa Rinpoche and Ramakrishna. These were all Hindu Maharajis, but Hindu and Tibetan Buddhism shared a substantial number of the same concepts. And one of those concepts was imagination. And that's exactly when the dialogue between Quan and Queen and Quail starts. Quan is entirely talking about imagination. That food is essentially, and being a gourmand, that's what they call it, a gourmand, it's about imagination. And your skills as a gourmand will be a parallel to how far your imagination can go. And Quan and Quail fell out over this. Quan said that Quail's imagination wasn't developed enough. They become very strange with the wording. They start saying things like, once you have imagination, like you won't even need to actually eat. Or no, you won't need food to eat. And there's also a scene of like one of them trying to fish the mist and saying, I'm going to eat the mist. Like suddenly you won't need anything to eat. No, again, just before that there was an imaginary buffet, imagination that Quina had made. And this is also, the mist, the air, consuming that. There was also a Hindu and a Tibetan Buddhist philosophy, pranayama. Some Hindus say that essentially you start existing on life force alone. What with the breathing exercises that they do with yoga, and pranayama practices. Some of them make claims that they haven't eaten in like 5 or 10 years and whatnot, and they exist purely on air. And once they become so high, the density of their spirit becomes a certain level, they can exist on air alone. But if it's not my path, chubby chunky Pez. but you get it. The theme is there. And what then happens is Quan just says that the time is over, and Vivi's also there and calls Quan grandpa. Then it clicked. So when they're talking about imagination, they're talking about higher states of consciousness. When they describe imagination and developing it, it's akin to the guru or the Maharaji in these stories developing their consciousness, their awareness, becoming more and more enlightened, and then basically existing on purely spirit force alone. And this is what they're just calling imagination in this. Follow me. Because obviously what we know about Vivi is it was just a doll, right? It fell off, I think, one of the plane things in Trino, and it was picked up by the queue. Quan raised Vivi, and the Vivi that we see in Alexandria at the start of the game, that one has already started developing consciousness and complex emotions. And Vivi even says it, that Quan, whose initial motive for raising Vivi was hoping that he would get bigger so that he could eventually eat him. And Vivi says, they've taught me so much about life. They've taught me many, many things. And that essentially the implication being that the Q have essentially given the complex consciousness to Vivi that Vivi has. Oh, and then, Quan says, I'm going to leave now. And Vivi's like, are you leaving again, Grandpa? And then Quan just floats out of his body. Just floats out. Is there all corporeal 1 minute and then just floats out. Just like Ramakrishna just left his. And they all kind of have a moment of seeing his ghost dissipate. And then Zidane says, who are you all talking to? Quan, Quail and Vivi, Quina, Quail and Vivi, fucking hell these names. Quina, Quail and Vivi, about Quan, they suddenly realise oh, you didn't see Quan at all? And Zidane's just like, no, like, who is that? Who you were all just talking to nobody. And then there's a line where, either comes from Vivi or from Quina, that essentially says, Zidane, you still have so much to learn. Or like, Zidane, you'll get there one day. And then the scene ends. The scenes end. And Vivi and both Quina, they have this moment of understanding as to why Zidane can't see. That relationship with imagination and consciousness, that Vivi and Quina have been on that journey together, and Zidane's not there yet. And all of a sudden, my fucking deep senses were tingling. I was like, oh snap. They're having a very 4D, while we're all sitting there thinking, oh, this is just some random ass scene about imagining food, like Peter Pan and, the Lost Boys where they imagine their food. It's just like, it's deeper than that. They're talking about a spiritual and, I believe, higher consciousness concept. And again, the fact that Tibetan Buddhism is kind of the garb of what Quan seems to be wearing. I then went and looked up imagination, and it came up in both Hinduism and Tibetan Buddhism. They share the exact same ideology behind it, that they call imagination kalpana. Well, kalpana is just one of the 4 versions of imagination. Now, very quickly breaking down these 4, 2 of them, Vilkalpa and Pratibha, are considered lower versions of imagination. These are the more temporary, sort of meaningless ones, which is what we experience. Because, the word imagination for us kind of really just has one meaning. It's very, two-dimensional, the way we Westerners describe imagination. Oh, imagination, just figments of my mind. We don't dissect the same way that the Hindus and the Buddhists do these things and just the complexities of them. And the 2 lower ones, I would say, is just like daydreaming. We're just having like whimsical, random imaginations, imagining scenarios, or imagining what you would have said if you were back in that scenario, imagining what you're going to do when you go to work tomorrow. And that these are lower forms of imagination because they're just mental noise, essentially. They don't really serve a much higher purpose or divine purpose in any way. And they give an example of daydreaming in class, seeing a shadow in the dark, fearing a ghost, these kind of things. But the other 2, and specifically kalpana, serves a much higher, more noble, more enlightened purpose. Kalpana, which still means imagination, is intentional mental creation, manifesting things into our reality. And this is what I guess we call manifesting, or some would say law of attraction, or others say visualization. The idea of, you hold it in your head, eventually you'll hold it in your hands. Something that does not yet exist in the physical dimension, but kalpana helps us to aspire towards a goal or vision and bring it into the physical world. Pratibha, the other one, very quickly, the higher noble purpose form, is spontaneous visionary insight that comes from when your consciousness is expanding into the higher realms of super consciousness. That's where you'll start having synchronicities, where you'll suddenly have new possibilities, or like what feel like star-crossed meetings and scenarios, and like fate and like luck, like things just fall into your lap. Like you really are just in the flow of life, and it's like it's just laying the steps in front of you, and you're just breezing over it. And I feel like that really is. I've only ever been in that state once in my life, is when I was like meditating every single day, yoga every day, my eating was on point, I was journaling, I was doing everything. And I experienced, for a small blip of time, this happening. Things were just happening in my life. Almost at one point, it didn't even feel like I had to try. It just was happening. It was such a high. I need to get back to that, but I'm a lazy shit. But yeah, going a little bit deeper into kalpana, the conceptual construction that brings things into reality. The Hindus and the Buddhists, the Vedic thinkers, held the view that the universe is merely an idea, that a kalpana, a phantom or projection of the mind, that you are tapping into the mind of the creator. Even the experience of birth and death, even those are kalpana. So when you had Quan, just before he's dying, give this talk. And one of the things that he says, yeah, I'm never going to be really gone. As long as you can imagine me. Doesn't say remember, doesn't say think about me. He said, as long as you can imagine me, I'll be there. I'll always be here. And it disappears. Even death is kalpana, imagination. Mental kalpana, that does go through a phase of ignorance, full superimposition by the internal struggles of like your shadow self and your ego, self-deception, ruses, ploys, the lords of ego and their complex chess game, and that attaining yoga within oneself and becoming self-reliant, that building this power, you gain an arising spontaneously of your ability to manifest into reality all the creator's gifts. They basically become under your own umbrella and you can create your world. And here we have the Q and Quina creating the buffet. Q, the ones who rose up, Vivi's consciousness, and then Vivi also understanding this concept as well. The same Vivi that later down the line leaves us that heart-wrenching message, about, to Zidane and the gang, said the same thing to them that Vivi said to the Q. Vivi thanks the gang for all the things that they taught him, all the lessons that being with them gave to Vivi, and that Vivi will always be there, up in there, in the sky, in the all, in the everything. Vivi has that same, like the Q, Quan, before death, like Ramakrishna, a knowingness of their departure from the world, and that they come to a peace with impermanence, a deep peace. In Ramakrishna, there was no holding or struggling or mourning. There was nothing but peace with the impermanence, and that his death was coming. And Vivi knew that as well, that the black mages had a very short lifespan and went into it with grace and contentment and gratitude. And if that ain't the most beautiful, goddamn, thing to aim for in your life, that at the end of it you won't have regrets, you'll be full of memories and the people that you had experiences with. And this right here is what I think Quina brought to the table. And just one final note, in Ayurvedic dieting, which is, I suppose you could call spiritual dieting, or dieting with that intention to balance your body on a much more harmonious level, to give rise to a more cultivated inner world. One of the highest forms of Ayurvedic dieting, can you guess what it's called? It's called Ahara Kalpana. You break those words down into Sanskrit. Ahara refers to food or nourishment, both in a physical or spiritual sense. Ahara, food, and Kalpana, imagination. Food, imagination. Food, imagination. Queen is deep. Quina is deep, deep. Are you convinced? Are you convinced? I was skeptical this was going anywhere. Like, am I really going to be able to convince the audience that one of the derpiest Derpmeister characters in the whole series is actually, and it snuck under our nose all these years? I don't think anyone's ever uncovered this. I think I'm ripping the mask off. I mean, how old is the game? What was it? 99? 99? 26 years. Quina was a pointless comedy relief character, and right there, I feel I've put some substance as to why Quina is absolutely anything but. I have no idea whether Square Enix intended this. Probably not. But come on. I mean, the parallels there, regardless, that's how I now see Quina. Quina was an embodiment of the spiritual journey and development of fundamental consciousness itself, of the journey of effortless effort, which is, moving through life. Now, with the effortless effort, life isn't no effort whatsoever. You have to put in effort, but you put in effort to achieve the quality of effortlessness, where everything flows. Serve a higher purpose in the world, while also being completely present in the simplicity and the simple present here and now. That's all I got for you. Did I just snort? I did a little bit. Let me know how this microphone sounds. Well, I mean, I'll hear it in editing. I don't know why I'm asking you. Hopefully it's good, and I haven't just got overexcited for nothing. Very soon, coming to the channel, going to be doing the Magic the Gathering stuff. My pre-release cards are out there. My friend is holding them, and he's mocking me that he's got them and threatening me that he's going to open them. I'll be playing that online, so I'm going to be back to streaming. And yeah, I'm turning 33 soon, so how could I not play Expedition 33 at 33? It feels like it's meant to be. It's fate. And with the amount of you guys that have been telling me I absolutely must play this thing, yeah, thinking I'm going to come back to streaming with it. But anyway, guys, thanks for watching.